Hi there, and welcome from all of us at Common Sense. I'm Lisa Solomon, and I've been with the nonprofit for 7 years. The best part of my job is helping families navigate this frenetic media and tech space. So I want you to take a deep breath, and I thank you this morning for making the time to join us for this very important conversation. And I promise that you're going to come away with at least 2 or 3 tips that you can try at home today. But please remember, and I learned this the hard way, that after this session, don't go and brain dump everything all at once on your kids. Consider parsing it out in small, bite-sized teachable moments, or our kids, and I do have 2 teens, definitely will tune us out. Our goal today is to explore the impact of technology and how our kids consume information and make meaning of the world. And we are so very grateful for the support and the partnership of the many, many school communities joining in from around the country. And I'm so thankful to all of you who support the nonprofit work that we do for all families and educators around the world. Before we jump in, I just have a few housekeeping items. Our panel will speak for approximately 50 minutes, and we're going to do our best to answer questions along the way. But please know that our team has read all of your questions that have been submitted ahead of time, and there were some great ones, and they have been threaded into the upcoming conversation. If you are joining us live, I encourage you to pop comments and new questions into the chat. We will be monitoring that in real time, and our team will also add useful resources in the chat, so keep an eye on that as well. We are recording this, including the chat, and it will be available to watch again later on the Common Sense Media for Families YouTube channel, and I'll pop that link in the chat in just a moment. So on to the program. Today's moderator is my Common Sense colleague, Isha Butch. She's director of our education programs. Isha has more than 12 years of experience working in the K-12 education sector. And before joining Common Sense, she was a middle school teacher and administrator in New York City. Among many other things, Isha now develops research-based curricula to ensure the digital well-being of all students, with dedicated efforts to help promote a positive learning culture around media and technology within schools. And when she's not working, Isha can be found jamming out to Baby Beluga with her 2 toddlers. Isha, thank you so much for being here. And now I'm going to throw it over to you this morning.
Thank you, Lisa. Now it's my turn to introduce our speakers, authors, and researchers, Carrie James and Emily Weinstein, both from Project Zero at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. They are here to discuss their insightful new book, Behind Their Screens: What Teens Are Facing. Emily is a psychologist and a principal investigator at Project Zero and lecturer at the Graduate School of Education. Carrie is a sociologist and is also a principal investigator at Project Zero and the author of Disconnected: Youth, New Media, and the Ethics Gap. The author's work has been covered in Time, the Boston Globe, NPR, the Washington Post, and the Atlantic. And they were just on the Today Show, and they are very sought after speakers on teens and technology. Carrie and Emily, it is so wonderful to be in conversation with you both today. There's a lot of history between Common Sense and Carrie and Emily. 13 years ago, when the MacArthur Foundation launched its Digital Media and Learning Initiative to look at how digital media was impacting learning, they reached out to Project Zero as academic researchers and Common Sense as the parenting leads. And we've been working in tandem to unpack what it's like for young people to learn and live with tech ever since. We collaborated to create Common Sense's first K-12 digital citizenship curriculum that is now taught in over 96,000 schools across the country, and continue to work together to introduce new resources for schools and families to address the ever-evolving challenges of our digital world. I've personally had the chance to work alongside both of you over the years, and I just wanted to applaud you on this book. In particular, the ways in which you privileged teen voices and offer really astute conclusions about how and why growing up in a 24/7 digital world can be so unfamiliar to parents and tricky for kids to navigate. Each chapter of this book summarizes Emily and Carrie's research findings with a helpful framework called What Teens Want Parents to Know. So listen up to what they have learned when they looked behind their screens.
Thank you so much, Isha, for that wonderful introduction. And I love how you sort of trace the history of our really close relationship between Project Zero and Common Sense. We have absolutely loved working with Common Sense, and we love doing this research. So we're so excited to be here today and share some of the insights that came out of this work. So let's dig in. I'll start by saying, we all know that tech is a reality of our world, and it's a reality of teens' lives, whether we like it or not. So it's really essential for adults to understand what's great about it, what's hard about it, and that way we are better positioned to create more appropriate guardrails and empower our kids with the skills and the dispositions that they need to thrive. Isha, I love that you teed up the part of our book that really focuses on what teens want adults to know, because that is truly at the heart of the research that we've been carrying out most recently. We've been listening closely and carefully to teens so that we as adults can understand what we're missing and provide much better support. And let me just name a couple of really intriguing quotes that came up when we did ask teens that question: what do you want adults to know? So one teen told us, I want adults to know that not all the time we spend on our phones is fun for us. Some of it can be very stressful and upsetting. Then we also heard from the same teen and other teens, our entire life is linked to social media. So that means it doesn't feel optional, even though sometimes it can be stressful and upsetting. We also heard things like, just because we're on our device doesn't mean that we're wasting our time. But also, I want to enjoy my actual life. I don't want to be obsessed with what others think about my social media. So real awareness of habits there. This is all to say that when we tune into the details of teens' lives behind their screens and what they're thinking, we realize that there's so much that we're missing about both the upsides and the challenges of growing up in today's connected world.
So this book is based on research we did with more than 3,500 middle and high schoolers across the US, and we're so excited to share with you what we learned along the way. Before we dive into the details, though, we wanted to name a few fundamentals. First, kids are impacted by tech in really different ways. If you have two kids, you likely know this to be true. Our kids bring different sensitivities and strengths to tech, and then social media and smartphones can amplify them in really different ways. And it's not only that kids are different, but each app has many different pros and cons, and the apps are constantly changing. In many ways, doing this research feels like we're chasing a moving target. Tech changes so fast, and the ways teens use apps change too. It feels hard to believe that we weren't even asking about TikTok a few years ago when we started the research for this book, and it was just such an essential part of the social media landscape as we were writing it. So kids are complicated and tech is complicated. You might be wondering, is there any dry land? Is this just a battle that we're going to lose before we start? But the answer is there definitely is dry land. For starters, Carrie and I use a developmental lens in our work to focus on what we know about why teenagers think and act and feel the ways that they do. And this really helps us wade through some of the panic and the noise that often swirls around tech and tech parenting and get to the heart of what's hard and what our kids most need from us.
Amazing. Thank you both. Well, let's get into it then. We'll dive into 3 topics from the book, which is just a subset of all the findings reported in the book, but we only have so much time. At the end, we'll come back to how parents can build digital agency in their children and help you frame useful conversations on these topics with your kids. The first chapter is called The Pull of the Screen, something I know most of us are feeling all the time. What does this mean for kids today?
There was this amazing moment in our research when we were talking to a 16-year-old. His pseudonym, his fake name he picked for himself was Graham. So we were talking to Graham over Zoom, and he wanted to share the extent of his TikTok use over the last week, how many hours he'd spent on the platform. But he didn't even want to say the number out loud because he was worried that his mom would overhear from the next room. So he typed into the chat, it was 24 hours. And then he looked at us as if to say, can you believe it? And of course, yes, we believe it. And we actually had this full circle moment a few weeks ago when we were connecting with Graham again, and we told him that we've been sharing this story. And even he was like, wow, that's just crazy. That was a dark time for me. My TikTok use is like down to half of that now. Can't believe I was using it so much. But what's really interesting is this isn't just one kid. And what's interesting is that in that initial conversation with Graham, he shared this sentiment that we heard again and again and again. He was actually really worried about aspects of his tech habits. Even as he resisted adults' efforts to restrict his tech use, he had plenty of his own concerns and wishes for how he wanted to live with tech and what he was struggling with. Other teens say things like, I just can't seem to get off of social media even when I want to, or I don't want to look back and realize that I've wasted my life on some pointless game. We heard these sentiments from teens again and again.
Yeah, those quotes are so powerful, and they really point to a larger finding, which is teens are actually impressively aware of the ways that they can feel dysregulated and kind of out of control by their tech. And they can be aware of habits that aren't really serving them. But in practice, this awareness alone doesn't mean that they can necessarily work toward better digital habits. And that's because the pull of the screen is really strong. And we have to recognize that these apps are designed in ways that play and even prey on adolescents' developmental sensitivities, their instinct to care deeply about what their peers are doing and thinking, not to mention features like infinite scroll that make sure we never get to the end of our newsfeed, and autoplay so that the next YouTube or Netflix video comes up. And those are things that actually pause that stopping cue that otherwise would lead us to say, okay, I've had enough, I need to do other things. So these are things that are built into the tech, and it's hard for all of us. We can probably relate to some of those things, but even more so for adolescents who are literally still developing their capacities for self-regulation. So knowing that teens actually worry about their tech habits too is really important. Once we recognize that, our concern about the pull of the screen is shared, we can really pivot from an us versus them battle over devices, which we often feel like we get stuck in, to an us and them approach, where we can really act like a team and recognize that the battle with tech is one that we're all fighting in different ways.
I think that's such an important insight that can be helpful in guiding the way we support our children. So I'm wondering, like, what can adults do to get to that us and them approach?
Well, we're really important tech role models for our kids. And a perhaps uncomfortable truth is that one really important thing we can do is start by considering what we're modeling when it comes to tech habits. What do our kids see when they watch us and how we interact with our devices, with our phones, with social media, our emails? There's actually a term in the research, technoference, which is the term for tech-related disruptions that interfere with the quality of our connections. And there's a growing body of evidence about the impacts of technoference on our relationships, whether it's our feelings of intimacy with our partners, the quality of connection we feel with our friends, and the sense of trust, but also, really importantly, the warmth and connection that our kids feel from us. So it's really costly when we have these constant tech disruptions that send a message to our kids that whatever is on our screen is more important to us than them in that moment. And I'll just say, this is one of the aspects of the research that I think has had the biggest impact on my own parenting, really looking at my own tech habits and seeing how they are and aren't always aligned with my values and with the things I want to be doing. And I know that that pull of the screen is so strong and that I can't always resist it. So, for example, when I'm putting my toddler to bed and we are on frequently like the 78th story, and I'm thinking, oh, I'll just like quickly check my email. I noticed that I get pulled in. I don't quickly check my email, but I also noticed that she sees me doing that. She notices when I divert my eyes, when I pull open my email app. So I started actually leaving my phone downstairs during bedtime because I felt like I know all this evidence on technoference, and yet, man, it is so hard for me. And sometimes we really do need these kinds of strategies. Our kids are really craving our focused attention, even when they're really struggling with their own screen habits, and even when they don't give it to us in return.
I so relate to so many of the personal anecdotes Emily shared about the pulls I feel, especially as I parent, and the ways in which I try to be really intentional. So Emily really brought us into thinking about technoference and being aware of the way in which we're modeling different kinds of habits. But I want to say that there are also some more directive things we can do around our teens' habits. So the first thing we can do is we can actually talk explicitly about persuasive design. So we can talk about the design features that pull us in, and it's actually an evidence-based practice to do that kind of discussing. It can really boost teens' motivations to take back control. So what does this mean? It means drilling down into how certain tech features are purposefully designed to persuade you to keep your eyes on the app. And for adolescents, this is really powerful because it taps into their sensitivity to being duped or manipulated. No one likes to be manipulated, but teens especially. And so highlighting how things that they may value, like fairness and being autonomous and being able to make their own choices, and how those things are undercut by design features can actually really work. And again, this is an evidence-based practice. It's been revealed in research, so it's very good to pay attention to that. So, but another thing we often need to do as well is really coach our kids around their own habits. And when we do this, our approach is really important. Coming at them with only the things that you want them to change is likely going to be a non-starter. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. I certainly have in my own parenting. So here's what we've learned. There's a simple but high impact pivot when we start with what they want to change. So asking them about what habits they already have that they feel good about and why they think they're working is an important first step. Second, what are the ones that they really wish they could change? And this is a much better way into a more productive conversation. Another thing is that we're really big fans of approaching habit changes as experiments, specifically time-limited experiments. So the idea is just try something out. Like you say that this is a habit that you want to change. So how about, try something out for a week or even just a few days and then stand back and reflect. And you can say explicitly to your child at the beginning, if we don't like how it's working out, whether it's trying out a tech-free breakfast or putting your phone in another room while you're doing your homework, whatever the habit is, if you try it out and it's not working, we can go back to the way things are, or go back to the drawing board and think of a new thing. But this experimental frame can really help gain buy-in and can feel like a much easier entry point than just delete TikTok forever. So that's really key. And, the things that I named are really core principles from habit science that we've drawn on to design specific resources that are in the Common Sense portfolio of resources. One is called Digital Habits Checkup. We created it with Common Sense. It's a lesson resource. And it's meant to be used as a routine, and it has a really important end goal, which is empowering students and really giving them a sense of agency toward their own digital experiences and habits. And I think the link to Digital Habits Checkup will be shared with you all.
Thank you both. What really resonates with me, and I know we have talked about this with Digital Habits Checkup, is just even being able to suggest small challenges to take on. Like, it doesn't have to be, I'm going to put my phone away for the rest of the day or for, all of my bedtime, just like little pieces that you can kind of start with and try that for a few days. So I really like the idea of kind of thinking about it in a more approachable way. I know the topic of screen time and media balance is of high importance to parents, so we will be dropping in some relevant resources from Common Sense that you can reference later, including what Carrie just mentioned with the Digital Habits Checkup. As adults, we use our screens for much more than driving directions and news. We too are connected to using them to connect to our friends and our family. And for kids, being connected all the time is particularly fraught. So I'm just wondering, can you talk a little bit about the impact media and tech has on teens' friendships?
Yeah, this is such an important aspect of what we heard from teens because it's really layered. Obviously, there are really tremendous positives around connection and feeling close in meaningful ways. One really interesting challenge, though, first came up as an insight from a survey question that we asked around being available. So did you know that most teens see being available whenever their friends need them as part of being a good friend? They see being available whenever their friends need them as part of being a good friend. And now we have given them devices that allow for the possibility of 24/7 connectivity. And so we hear from teens, perhaps unsurprisingly, these real fears that being unavailable will cost them friendships. Maybe imagine feeling like this. Imagine feeling like if you didn't reply quickly enough, your best friend would replace you, would just go to someone else, and you wouldn't be as important in their life anymore. For teens, their friendships, their sense of who they're closest to, that is actually often very intertwined with their sense of identity and their feelings about who they are. So this idea that being available might have impacts on their friendship can actually feel like a threat to their sense of self. The stakes feel really, really high here.
Yeah, and that's not all. And I'm going to bring us into even higher stakes territory that we heard about when talking to teens. So one thing we really hadn't appreciated is the sort of hidden toll that is unfolding amid the current adolescent mental health crisis. So what this means is we all know that there's a crisis going on in terms of adolescents' sense of mental health and well-being. And what that means right now is that even if a teen is not personally struggling, they are more likely than ever to have someone in their network who is. And so thinking about what that means for them, we can probably move in the direction of what I'm going to share. So social media has essentially made it so that teens are seeing posts from others, literal digital cries for help that raise so many puzzles about whether, when, and how to respond, how to be a good friend, as Emily teed up for us. So teens told us about feeling tremendous pressure to be available for close friends who are struggling. This can be really hard, especially when an adult is saying, can't you just get off your phone? And on the one hand, and on the other hand, the friend who's really struggling is saying, I really need you right now. I really need you to be there for me. So teens really told us about this tremendous pressure. We tell a story in the book about a middle schooler named Allie, who sees actually not a close friend, but more of a peer's cries for help unfolding on Snapchat. And we see those cries really escalate from mildly concerning to alarming over a pretty short period of time, and really wondering what to do. What is her role, especially if this person is a more distant peer? So this is an incredibly heavy burden on young shoulders, and something that we need to acknowledge is happening for some teens, and think then about what kinds of supports they need.
Yeah, that is heavy. You've likened the omnipresence of digital connections to being in a cafeteria all the time. If parents can remember back to middle and high school and put themselves in the mindset of that fishbowl mentality, what exactly do kids want parents to know about why friendship is so important to them at this time in life?
Well, I mean, it's going back to some of those developmental needs we've already referenced earlier, but I'll just, to put it really starkly, friendships are not a sideshow during adolescence. They're super important developmentally and to young people's sense of well-being. In many ways, establishing and maintaining close friendships is the key work of the teenage years. And we often talk about during the childhood years, play is the job of children. So in the adolescent years, building those friendships is really important. So recognizing that is one important thing. We also need to tune into the really subtle, often hidden ways that friendship pressures are playing out. So I just described teens feeling the pull of the screen because friends are struggling. In the book, we also unpack things like pressures to perform closeness. If you ever see on Instagram photo compilation stories dedicated to best friends on their birthdays, and the pressure to deliver over the top praise on their friend's latest picture and post. Those can be fun and joyous, but they can also feel like a sense of obligation, and teens feel stuck about how to be authentic in those situations. So all of this should be part of an overall recognition that empathy and caring about others is a key driver and pull to the screen. And it's really interesting to think about this. You know, we often lament the ways that technology can undercut empathy, make us feel really removed from people, undercut connection, without realizing that empathy can be a key driver to the screen and that need to give social support, but it can also be a key source of digital dilemmas that teens face. I'm going to pause there for a moment and see if Emily, is there anything you want to add on this point?
Yeah, I would just add, I think teens really were clear that they need us to talk directly with them about the ways they can set and hold boundaries that are self-protective. Maybe you can actually think about a time or when you've had a boss or a colleague who emails you at weird hours, or a friend who you really love who gets too needy. It's not always straightforward, but it's really important to figure out how to navigate communication, set boundaries that help us maintain relationships we care about while also protecting our own needs and our own well-being. And adolescents especially really need support. This is hard at any age, but especially as your perspective taking and communication skills are still developing and those relationships feel so important. We've designed a specific resource, another one that's part of the Common Sense suite, which I think we'll drop into the chat, called Feelings and Options. And this is part of Digital Dilemmas Hub, which supports teens to really think through key dilemmas that they told us again and again are coming up. And Feelings and Options is actually a tool that we especially love because it actually walks teens through developing language around things like setting boundaries that we know can be really hard for them. So how do you actually find and develop that language that is kind and compassionate, but also holds boundaries? Also, Carrie mentioned the idea of seeing posts from friends or peers that signal mental health issues. And one thing that we think is super important is talking very explicitly with your kids about what to do if they see a post that seems concerning, whether it's from someone in their extended network or someone who they're closer to. In the Common Sense curriculum, we talk about this idea of red flag feelings a lot, and this is really essential. But it really comes down to telling our kids, pay attention. If something gives you that red flag feeling, that sense like this person might not be okay, or something about this doesn't feel right to me, don't just scroll on. If you see something concerning, come to me, go to a trusted adult, talk about who they should go to, and make sure that they know that you recognize that they will not have done anything wrong, but that sometimes seeing these posts is just part of the digital landscape.
I'm seeing in the chat that there are some questions coming up about social comparison and how this is a really important part of the landscape that teens are wrestling with, especially and relevant to this broader topic of friendship. So we did drill down into this topic with young people, and it was really revealing. A couple of things that I'll say about it. Number one is that for some teens, the pull toward social comparison is much stronger than for others. So some teens really talk about being pulled into what we call comparison quicksand, where they see pictures of their friends, pictures of influencers, and inevitably feel negatively about themselves, either about their physical appearance or about the ways in which they're living their lives and their access to material things. All kinds of things can be grounds for social comparison, but some teens are more susceptible to doing that. And I think that's a really important thing to pay attention to. Other teens just recognize highlight reels in many ways for what they are. People are showing their best moments. So tuning into the details and noticing whether your own teen is more inclined to what we say compare and despair is really important. A second thing that we've noticed in drilling down on this topic is that it's not just the highlight reels that lead to a level of comparison. So there are different there's almost like a new, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a new trend in social media posts that's really about authenticity. And so it can involve, someone starting out with like, zero makeup and showing their blemished skin, and then transforming themselves in front of the live audience to really show that like, this is, makeup, and what we put on is we're covering up, but it's not hiding that authentic reality. Or authentic sharing of pain points. So that is an emerging trend that can be incredibly powerful, but it doesn't always help teens who are inclined to compare feel better about themselves. And it can go something like this. A teen can see someone being really authentic and talking about how their skin looks terrible and look at it and say, well, if that's their skin on their worst day, that's my skin on my best day. And so it can actually really contribute to that negative body image and negative sense of well-being. So really being alert to, it's not just the highlight reels that can lead to social comparison that's toxic or negative.
I'll just add that comparison is actually totally normal developmentally and across the ways that we socialize and connect with other people. And social comparison, this tendency toward comparison, actually increases as kids move from the earlier childhood years into adolescence. So you might think about the idea that little kids say and really believe things like, I'm the best swimmer in the whole world, or I'm the best whatever in the whole world. And part of what happens is we actually are making these comparisons between ourselves and others as we get older that help us develop a more realistic sense of self and a more realistic self-concept. Of course, that actually can be associated with is often associated with a dip in self-esteem, because it's hard to realize that we're not the best swimmer in the whole wide world. And the path to a more accurate self-concept and sense of self can be paved with comparisons that really sting and have a particular sting during those early adolescent years. That has been going on since long before social media. But what's happened is we have these social media apps and tools that are providing this type of content that is really ripe for comparison. And I think that this social comparison point is just worth underlining, because across the research, across the literature on social media and well-being, we see that toxic comparisons, specifically the kinds of comparisons where you look at someone else's feed and you think to yourself, why is everyone happier than me? Or why does everyone seem to have a better life than me? That kind of thinking during our social media use is actually a risk factor for well-being disruptions and the kinds of consequences that most of us want to help our kids avoid. So boosting the impulse and the self-talk that helps mitigate some of that. We're not going to be able to erase it all the way, but addressing and just being alert to that is really important. And recognizing that if you have a kid who is more prone to social comparison, they're in a chapter of their life where they're just more inclined in that direction, there are ways that social media can really amplify that challenge. And so giving them some additional support, really digging into that, narrating your own reactions, like saying things like, wow, it feels like everyone on my feed is always looking so much happier than me. It can't be the case that people are always happier than me, right? So really, really thinking about that is important. And one other way that we do this in our own research is through an activity called co-browsing. And some of your kids might not be open to this at all, but maybe others of you have kids who are. So we actually will sit down with someone and we will say to them, we'd love to hear what you see when you look on your feed. So just, even though we're sitting right next to them, we say, just narrate aloud for us any reactions you have as you're looking at the content on your feed. And this is such a powerful research method because it allows us to see what they hover on, what they breeze past, but also how they're reacting and interpreting the content they see. And as they do that, we have opportunities to also do the kinds of education and interventions that often as parents, we really want to do, where we say things like, oh, that's really interesting. I noticed that you're feeling like a lot of people are happier than you. Or are always out socializing. Let's talk about that a little bit. So again, a great opportunity.
Thank you both. Really, really insightful. I just wanted to go back to kind of the thinking around friendship and kind of some of the challenges that persist online with being connected all the time, or even social comparison to that end. There is obviously the unavoidable, inevitable teenage drama that can occur. And the book does a really great job of explaining the pernicious and complicated nature of snubbing and slights. Not to spend too much time here, but what are the headlines for parents?
Yeah, it's frankly pretty astounding to think about how much new social information teenagers are managing. This was a big whoa for us in like whoa moment for us in doing the research. Adults often think about cyberbullying, but so much of what we heard from teens is really hard on kind of an everyday basis, is much less explicit. There is a spillover between drama offline and drama online, like when people are subbing each other in stories. So maybe I'm posting a story and everyone knows that it's about you, but I haven't actually tagged you. So I have some plausible deniability. So if I was subbing about Carrie right now, I might say things like, I hate when I'm giving a talk and someone shows up wearing a white V-neck shirt with pockets. And everyone who's watching this talk knows exactly who I'm talking about. But I have this ability to say, oh, no, that wasn't really about Carrie. Of course, sometimes people are directly calling each other out, but there is a degree of ambiguity that teens describe to us as really important. And this gets amplified through the ways that they're also learning about things like social exclusion through kinds of social information that leave them unsure if something is shared to hurt their feelings or maybe just shared without consideration of their feelings. I'll give you one example here. Venmo, the app that we use to exchange money. This can be something that most of us think of as maybe pretty benign, but can you imagine if you were a teen and you were on Venmo and you noticed that your 5 best friends had just Venmo charged each other for movie tickets or for Dunkin' Donuts? And you find out because of that Venmo transaction that you've just been excluded. This is a new kind of social information that didn't exist in the past. The feeling of being left out is nothing new, but they are navigating a landscape with so much new social information to analyze and worry about.
Yeah, that Venmo example is so just like sort of crystallizes something that we need to do as adults, as parents. Teens told us that adults just are often oblivious to the non-obvious ways that meanness can play out. We're really, as you know, we often talk about cyberbullying, as Emily noted, but these more subtle ways escape our attention. And so we can be much more alert to the ways that tech features that appear benign or even can be positive can also make slights and outright exclusion really visible to teens, and how this really hurts. And there's some evidence from research that the pain of being left out is actually greater in adolescence. So it's easy to roll our eyes and be like, everyone gets left out at some point. But it's also important to tune into how weighty that can feel for adolescents. So even if you didn't go through your own Snapchat or your own adolescence with Snapchat as a key vehicle for engaging with friends, you probably remember the sting. So understanding that positions us in a much better way to validate their really real feelings rather than just trying to say, well, just get off the app, or, like it's not that important, next time you will be invited.
Yeah, I mean, it's no wonder parents want kids to just get off their phones and settle down to do homework or chores or sleep. And I'll take this moment to remind us all that getting enough sleep is key to your child's mental health. We had a few questions about devices in the bedroom, and we all strongly advocate for no screens at night to ensure that all kids get the sleep they need and manage all that they have to do in their lives.
Yeah, this is such an important point. The research that Common Sense has done has really underlined the importance of this, that shows that 1 in 3 teens wakes up at night to check their phone. And that is a figure we should pay attention to. It's not hard to appreciate the impact that this has on teen sleep and, in turn, their ability to learn when they go to school and their sense of mental health and well-being. So yes, phones out of the bedroom at night can be a really important stepping stone. More generally, one thing we heard from teens about what helps and what doesn't. And I was kind of referring to this before, is that adults often have the impulse to say, just get off your phone, or just, if that app is creating all kinds of a sense of FOMO or a sense that you've been excluded, then just delete the app, don't participate. But teens were really clear with us that just shutting down the device or deleting the app doesn't remove the feelings. And there's plenty of evidence that social support from friends, that these apps are actually used for that kind of social support, and it's so important. So if you cut off their access to Snapchat or even just to their phone overall, you're really cutting them off from access to friends who are delivering needed support at times of stress.
And at the same time, there are definitely moments when the single best thing we can do is help kids put down their phones, distract themselves from whatever's going on, reconnect with people who love them face to face as part of getting support. It can be hard to know which is best for which kid and which moment, but we really need to try and do that intentional step of understanding what are they getting from their phone right now? Is it more of whatever is toxic and making them feel bad, or is it social support that's really the antidote? And how do we proceed with that in mind? This actually also connects to another point that we heard from teens that's been coming up a lot recently, which is around the idea of FOMO. And something that Carrie and I were really struck by as we were doing this work is the idea that teens shared that FOMO, yes, thank you, the fear of missing out, and actually not just the fear of missing out, but in some cases, being left out, or the knowledge that you're being left out. These are really complicated emotions that are part of the digital landscape. And one of the things that we've heard a lot from adults is that there's this sense that social media is causing FOMO, and that we might be able to spare our kids from those feelings if only we keep them off of phones. And there are two reasons that teens told us that's not really the case. The first is that for some teens, first of all, a lot of what's happening that is intertwined with these FOMO experience is playing out through things like group chats and through apps that aren't the traditional, what you might think of as the traditional social media apps. So the Venmo example is one case of that. This doesn't mean that it's not also playing out through finding out through Snapchat map that your friends their avatars are all clustered together in one place, or seeing an Instagram post or story that shows you that your friends are hanging out. That's happening too. But teens, we were just in a conversation a few weeks ago with two teens who were talking about how they were both late adopters of social media. And they described how before they started using social media, they had this sense of always being kind of left out because their friends were always making plans and had all these inside jokes that they just honestly weren't seeing. And so they talked about this idea that they just felt like they weren't as much a part of the social scene. And that echoes this idea we heard from some teens, which was, if you're not on social media in my school, it's like you don't even exist. And yet they talked about how when they got social media, it wasn't that the FOMO went away. It just kind of changed shape because they started seeing evidence of people hanging out, and there's a new kind of FOMO. So just to say that this is complicated for teens. We don't necessarily spare them of FOMO by keeping them off of social media, and nor is the opposite true. But this is something that we really need to address directly.
Super fascinating. And I think it's just, reinforcing the need, as I think about my two toddlers and when they get to this point, of just the importance of just being able to openly communicate about the tech use that they're having, the experiences they're having. We're going to pivot here and talk about what I personally feel is one of the more intriguing aspects of your research, which deals with how kids struggle to express themselves civically online. So can you share what you learned in that space?
Yeah, so Emily and I have studied this particular question of how the digital and the civic kind of intersect and collide for a really long time. And our most recent research captured what a profound shift in the last 10 years. So in short, I'll try to keep this concise. A decade ago, when we spoke with teens and young adults about being political online, they told us it could be great, it could be challenging, but importantly, they felt like it was optional, kind of extra credit for their civic activities. Fast forward to today, and our most recent research revealed that for so many teens, that is no longer the case. Today, being civic on social media can feel expected and essential. And what's harder is that there are so many ways to get it wrong. So teens told us about things like their peers monitoring who speaks up and who doesn't about every issue, calling out anything that they see as performative or insincere or problematic. They describe things like being obligated to post and being scared to post. One teen said it goes both ways. You feel scared to post something, you feel obligated to post it. So that kind of between a rock and a hard place quality of experience. We also heard about friendships being very much on the line, breaking friendships over the presence or absence of social media posts about urgent civic issues, for example, Black Lives Matter. And the timing of posts really matters too. So one teen told us about a scandal that broke out in her high school that was sparked by a beach selfie that a girl posted that on any other day would have prompted a bunch of over-the-top compliments and praise, but it was the day after George Floyd was murdered. And there was a huge blowback in the comment thread about how being at the beach and taking a picture was so out of touch and insensitive to the realities of urgent issues that were folding in the world. So all that to say, teens really laid bare the ways that that being on social media today and the way in which they speak out civically or not is under the microscope.
For sure, there are clear positives in this landscape that teens wouldn't give up. They tell us that they embrace the chance to learn about civic issues and have a voice. They feel more connected and more knowledgeable. And posting about civic issues isn't easy activism as some adults might think it is, or as it's maybe been portrayed historically. We heard from teens how complicated it is both to think about how to speak up and also to weigh the cost of staying silent. We also heard from them about the realities of things like collecting receipts, where people are constantly taking screenshots, and how cancel culture is amplifying the stakes and in some cases trickling down even into their high schools as peers are canceling one another for missteps, big and small. Teens know for sure that their posts or even their private text messages can get screenshotted and that they can travel across space and time toward totally new meanings that maybe weren't what they intended at all. So maybe you're listening to this as we were doing this research. Certainly we had this feeling of, like, how do we help kids in this landscape? One, we really need to address the civic dimensions of social media. I think often we think about things like misinformation, fake news. That is really important, but we don't want to forget to talk about these other elements that weigh on teens, the thought process and decision-making around posting. And I'll just say all of this is one reason why we're really excited. Carrie and I got to give some feedback on the new common sense lessons, the new Civics in Digital Life lessons, which are a really great entry point for talking about some of these civic digital dilemmas.
I'll just cap this off with kind of a final note in terms of if you're a parent and what you're thinking about this. Teens told us that the adults in their lives really, they really want to see a mind shift in terms of their perspectives on the digital and the civic. So teens wish adults understood kind of both sides, that social media can be really empowering to them on political and civic issues on the one hand, but also a minefield of risks and pressures. So we might say things like, stand up for what you believe in on the one hand, or don't post on social media about political issues, it's a train wreck, without realizing that both stances are hard. So they really asked to open up conversations about how these issues are playing out in their networks. So asking questions like, how does what you see on social media, how is it shaping the social issues that you care about? What are you seeing posting, your friends posting? And what do you think about when you post something about a current issue? What do you worry about? Do you ever feel an implicit or explicit obligation to share something? And this can lay the groundwork for really coaching them around strategies for making thoughtful choices about when and how to participate.
Awesome. Well, that's a lot of terrific information about what it's like to be in the heads of this generation. Now it's time to ask what you, Carrie and Emily, want parents to know. let's start with your advice around how parents can help build digital agency.
Okay, well, we definitely have underscored and doubled down on this idea of digital agency in the book. And I want to say first a word about why agency even matters. Psychologists have long talked about the importance of agency for our well-being. When we feel like our actions make a difference and like we can have some degree of control over our future and our lives. When we don't feel like anything we do makes a difference, we end up feeling helpless and like any effort isn't worthwhile. And these are the kinds of thoughts that can pave the road to depression when they're pronounced and really global. This all matters so much because much of what we heard from teens that's hard around tech is rooted in a sense that their agency is compromised, that they're not as in control as they want to be. The ways that technologies are designed undercut their feelings that they can regulate their habits. The social norms and pressures they feel, some of which we named today, can undercut their agency also. And then don't forget, we just named this briefly, but the realities of our world where it feels like mistakes are both an inevitable part of growing up, but also extremely costly and likely to persist and stay with them in some way forever if they're digitally documented. So these things can all take a toll on our sense of agency, our teen sense of feeling like nothing we do matters. Is it even worth it? So we really want to flip the script. Carrie, will you talk a little bit about how we do that?
Yeah, so in the final chapter of our book, we talk about 3 different types of agency, sort of as entry points to building that sense of empowerment among our kids and our students. So one, we talk about building a personal or individual level sense of agency. And so this can look like, for example, helping them feel more intentional and in control of their digital habits. So we talked about that earlier in this talk and some of those ways in. So that's one shining example of helping to build personal agency. We also talk about collective agency, and these are sort of peer-led efforts, ways that teens come together and collaborate around having each other's backs around the hard stuff. And so we can, as adults, really support those peer-led efforts and encourage teens to work together. Maybe it's putting their phones in a stack during a meal so that they can actually focus on the conversation in front of them, or other ways they can band together to protect each other's privacy and keep on the lookout for trouble spots. So that's individual or personal agency, collective agency. And then the last one is proxy agency. And that's where adults really come in a much more explicit way. We are proxy agents on behalf of our kids because in many areas of life, we have more power than they do to change things. So things we can do like advocating on behalf of policy changes that will affect the kinds of things that social media make accessible to youth. Big policy changes around protecting children's sense of privacy are another aspect of that. Also arguing for more and better digital citizenship education in our schools. So those are some important levers that in some ways only adults can pull. And so we should keep an eye out for those opportunities.
I love that. Your book also suggests a set of conversation keys to help guide parents as they support teens. Can you say more about those?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I do, though, I want to name one sort of final revelation. There's more in the book, but final revelation as part of this talk. And that's that teens actually want to talk to you about what they're navigating behind their screens. And they really told us that they need adult support and they know that adults have wisdom to offer, even if you don't know what a Snapchat snap map is, even if you don't know what Discord is and what it's used for. There's so much that you can do and so much wisdom you have about, life experience that really can be supportive to your teen. But first, we need a teen level view of the issues they're facing. And this is the most important starting place because the reality is, I hope what we've shared across this talk has shown you that it's much more complicated often than most adults appreciate. So in our book, we've laid out a set of conversation keys as a way of creating kind of new talking points or new entry points to the conversations we need to have with our teens. So a big one is asking over assuming. And so this is especially helpful when it comes to habits, for example. And one concrete tip that we have around asking over assuming is asking questions first about the positives of, the pull to the screen. Why are you so drawn to TikTok? What do you love about Snapchat? What's so dynamic about the content that you find in this game or that app? Who are your favorite people to follow on Instagram? So the reason why this is important is if we only ask for the negatives, then teens fear that this will only confirm our worst suspicions that social media is bad. So starting with the positives is always revealing to us, but it also signals that we really get that there's so much good in these devices, and we're there to help them navigate the hard stuff.
I'll just leave us off, I think, of this portion by saying that so often we find that adults get stuck in this role of being like the referees, where our only job is blowing the whistle when kids misstep or when their screen time is over time, and we're just calling them out on mistakes or correcting things that we see that we don't like. And one of the things that our research really made clear to us is that there is so much teens are navigating that they actually want and need more support and help around. And they need us to be not like the refs, but more like coaches, where we're really in this with them, strategizing the hard plays, helping them think through how to respond when something feels tricky, and giving them a sense that we are rooting for them so hard to be the best players they can be and to thrive in this landscape. So we really want to encourage you to lean into that coaching mentality. And as part of that, we'll just say also that it is really okay that different kids will need different rules and boundaries and guidelines when it comes to the ways you coach them around tech. We have this last key, complexity over commandments. And it's really important because the reality is that many universals won't work for particular kids or families. And you don't need to feel guilt over handling screen times or phones differently in your house or even differently with your different kids. That's actually really supported by the research. Kids have different struggles and they need different supports as we coach them through this landscape.
Thank you both so much. I just wanted to do a time check, and I know we've incorporated some of the questions from the chat into the discussion, but I did want to leave time for one more question that just came in from the audience. And that is that the question is, can I ask my daughter to let me see her cell and see what she is watching? When is it appropriate to monitor a child's device, and when does it intersect with their right to privacy?
Well, first of all, this is such a good question. It's a question we hear a lot, and it's just so important to be really thoughtful and intentional about this. And I appreciate the part of the question that recognizes that children and teens they do have a right to privacy. So we need to think about this. So I'll just say it's hard to answer this fully without knowing the age of this person's daughter, and your existing kind of relationship around tech and what it looks like and how open she is to talking with you about what she may be doing on her phone. But I think generally what's warranted and even essential for younger kids and tweens is probably going to feel invasive as teens get older. And I have two kids. I have a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old, and I play a much more active monitoring role in my 12-year-old's digital life. And Emily and I, in general, are big fans of the principle of gradual release as young people get older and show more responsibility and autonomy. So age is one thing, but also being alert to their strengths and their vulnerabilities is another. It may be that age 14 is the right time to pull back for some kids because they're an open book and they'll tell you what they're going through online. And in other cases, you want to continue monitoring a little bit later. It's a little bit more individual than that. Emily, do you want to name some principles to consider when you're actually doing that kind of active digital monitoring?
Yeah, so typically one thing that's key to consider is how to build trust on both sides, giving kids opportunities to show us that they are earning our trust, and also on the flip side, letting them know that they can really trust us in the way that we're approaching this. And so if you're monitoring, we really recommend that you consider doing it transparently, telling your kids your strategy and why you're monitoring, what your motivation is. You might say something like, a really important part of my job is to keep you safe and to help you get to use tech and learn how to use tech in ways that are good for your friendships and support your interests and allow you to have fun. And so I'm going to look at your phone and your texts periodically and as you start learning how to do this so that I can help you do that. And we will revisit this together over time as you get older. I think that fits into that idea of gradual release.
So helpful. Thank you both so much. I feel like I constantly go away with key takeaways and nuggets every time I talk to you or read something that you've done. So I really appreciate it. And I do want to turn it over to Lisa to close us out.
I just want to thank you, Carrie James, Emily Weinstein, and Isha Butch for their time and their expertise this morning. This has been terrific. And I want to thank all of you out there for joining us. I encourage you to consult Common Sense Media's resources as you work through the challenges of raising kids in today's connected world. I encourage you to check out the Behind Their Screens book for more details and information. We also have a wonderful free newsletter from Common Sense you can sign up for, and I put that information in the chat. And we will share the link in the recording shortly if you missed any of this. So that's it for this conversation with Common Sense and our Connected Schools program. Enjoy the rest of your day and be well.